Hello, ladies and jelly spoons. It is Notcast 192. It is the 14th of April 2022. The astute of you that will have read the subject line will know what I'm already talking about. But just in case, today I'm going to be talking about Depeche Mode's ninth studio album, released 25 years ago today on the 14th of April 1997. The first album recorded by the band as a trio. The album is Ultra. The result has aged better than I thought, but it is still not the best Depeche Mode album. Previous episodes, I've talked about all the other Depeche albums going through the sequence. Today, we're talking about this, and this one I lived and breathed in real time. The astute of you will know I am wearing a Depeche Mode at home t-shirt, the first Depeche Mode web exclusive t-shirt that you could only buy from their website in 1997 to go alongside the release of the single Home. In those days, bands were very good at putting out merchandise that had website addresses on, because it's all new and hip. It's the internet and it's a thing, and nothing. I don't think anybody really realised what a huge and enormous change the internet would have on the way in which the rest of the world operated. I remember even was it Nobel Prize winning economist said it would have about as much impact as the fax machine, without realising the impact that the fax machine had upon the world. No, the Depeche Mode website was first launched on the 13th of May 1997, and this was the web exclusive T-shirt that you could get from it. In fact, I've never seen anybody else wearing one of these. To be fair, I'd hardly ever wear mine. You can probably see it was also previously available in black, and now it's in a kind of dark grey, having been washed and worn hundreds of times over the past 25 years. And Ultra doesn't seem like an album, or it doesn't feel like an album that's a quarter of a century old. You go back to 25 years before Ultra, and you're at the point where I think Alive Insane hasn't been released, Dark Side of the Moon hasn't been released, the Beatles split up 2 years previously. It's a long way back in history. It doesn't feel like 25 years. And to me, this version of the band, the three-piece version of the band, or the five-piece version with Christian and Dave, when they play, Christian and Peter when they play live, feels to me like the new lineup of the band, and it still takes me a little bit of getting used to seeing the five-piece version. Whereas perhaps some other bands who I got into after the classic era came to an end, to me that version of the lineup is the one which I've always known, and we're quite sentimental. There's a nostalgia around lineups of the band. People always want the old lineups of the band to get together. People always say, I want Alan to get back to Depeche Mode. That's kind of like saying, well, do you want to go out with the same girl that you did when you were 17? And the answer is, well, for some people it's yes, but for most people it's probably no, isn't it, really? Time is an arrow, and it only goes one way, forward. It's not always a straight line, but it only ever goes forward. So the band had a problem, and that was, well, who are they going to be in 1997? The three-piece version of the band had lost their prime musician. Alan, I think, was the one who was clearly seen as the most musically gifted and adept of the members of the band. So we had three effective non-musicians, although that's not strictly true, although in Fletcher's case that's definitely true. So obviously we had Dave on vocals, Martin on guitar and keyboards, and Fletch officially on keyboards but unofficially probably playing the wooden spoon in the band. And then Depeche had to learn how to be a band again, and it was pretty strange. So they came back together, I think late 1995, with the idea of they'll do some test recordings, they'll see how it goes as a trio. And if the results weren't particularly good, they'd have a couple of songs that they could put on a greatest hits album, and if the results were particularly good, they could go for a full album. So they started in late 1995 with three songs, one of which was Barrel of a Gun. No, it wasn't actually. One of which was Useless, and one of which I think was Insight. And then they wrote more songs over time. I mean, effectively at this point, Depeche were relearning how to be a band. They were rebuilding how the band operated, replaced Alan with a team, and it became less of a band and more of a brand, really. Depeche Mode was the name that was given to the musical outputs of those three people, as opposed to those four musicians. I never got a sense whilst listening to Ultra that all of the musicians were playing the music at the same time in the same room together in a band huddled around in a circle. And I think that's something that really is the death knell of some bands. Some of the REM albums, some of the Depeche albums, you very definitely got a sense that these weren't albums of songs, they were albums of constructions. They were layered parts that were put together that from a distance you kind of squinted at them and you go, they look like songs and they kind of feel like songs, but you never got the sense that it was a bunch of guys in a room making a racket. You always got a sense that these songs had been constructed like houses from foundations. They weren't performances; they were creations, and that's what they were. And the band spent a lot of time recording Ultra. They had a lot of extra musicians. The idea that whose hand played what started to become somewhat irrelevant at this point. You know, you can hear Martin singing, Martin playing guitar. You can hear Dave singing. There's no audible evidence that Fletch plays on any of this album at all. And given that there are 12 extra musicians credited on the album sleeve, there are 5 drummers, 5 extra keyboardists, and there's there's an extra bass player and there's an extra guitar player in BJ Cole as well. You kind of almost got the sense that this was Depeche Mode by committee. Is that someone was doing a kind of like an imitation of Depeche Mode that sounded like Depeche Mode, featuring some members of Depeche Mode, and somehow if you called it Depeche Mode, people would think it was Depeche Mode. Now, this is not to say that this album is a forgery. It absolutely isn't. You remember Roger Waters' statement about Pink Floyd's Momentary Lapse of Reason album after he left, which he called it a pretty fair forgery of Pink Floyd. I think that'd be really unfair to this album. Ultra is actually a pretty good LP. It suffers from a lot of things that a lot of albums in the late 90s did, which is a thing called CD bloat. No longer restricted. Oh, there's some promotional flyers that have just fallen out of the gatefold sleeve for Ultra, but no longer restricted by the confines of a single album, so to speak, or a single kind of slab of vinyl. Bands felt no issues with doing long albums. Tori Amos's Boys for Pele was 76 minutes long and 18 songs long. I think that would have been a much better album if that had been maybe 11 songs and 50 minutes. Ultra was 60 minutes and 4 seconds, the longest Depeche Mode album to date, which, considering the band weren't even sure they were going to make an album when they started off, it really did feel like they included absolutely everything. In fact, I'm kind of surprised there isn't a track called Kitchen Sink on here, although there are 2 somewhat unexceptional instrumentals, one called Uselink and one called Jazz Thieves, which are largely kind of directionless instrumental atmospheric pieces, which would have been B-sides or perhaps not even credited if they'd been on previous bigger selling albums. And the sales for Ultra were healthy, very healthy. The album sold 4 million copies, which is pretty surprising, all things considered. But then you look at Songs of Faith and Devotion, which sold over 5 million, and Violator, which sold 7.5 million. And you kind of see that, Depeche is starting to visibly shrink before your eyes. The touring that they did after this, almost all of it wasn't in stadiums, whereas on the Devotional tour, they clearly were in stadiums. In America, on the Violator and the Devotional shows, they were in stadiums. And whereas here they were in arenas and they weren't always selling them out. So the band was shrinking before our eyes, but they were still very, very, very successful by any standard. And the album, when you listen to it, it doesn't feel like a classic album. It feels like a collection of songs stuck together, and it's almost less than the sum of its parts. If you go inside the gatefold there, and then there's the pictures of the 3 members of the band, you might be forgiven for thinking that the Depeche were just assuredly carrying on. But what you don't see, of course, is the duck's feet paddling under the water here. The Depeche were, I think, clearly having almost a crisis of faith. They weren't sure if there was a band at certain points. Even the documentary that follows the period, which is on the 2006 DVD issue of Ultra, which also has a 5.1 mix, the DVD is called Oh Well, That's the End of the Band. And looking at it from the outside, I was seeing Depeche Mode disintegrate before my eyes in real time, week by week. Every Wednesday, the Melody Maker and the NME would hit the newsstands, and I would go through the news, half expecting to hear the news that this time Dave Guard had finally actually died. as opposed to just merely died or only died for a couple of minutes. And obviously the Cure were having some significant lineup changes. New Order had fragmented into three bitter camps across Manchester. And so for me, a lot of the bands that had been seen as pretty much invincible and bulletproof 7 or 8 years ago were all falling to pieces. The concept of Depeche Mode became nebulous here. The concept of who played what had been removed, in much the same way that the Cure were, although there were officially 5 people, the Wrong Number single, which came out the same year as Ultra, according to the liner notes, only has Robert Smith, Jason Cooper, and Reeves Gabrels, who wasn't even a member of the band at the time, on the recording, although it was released as The Cure. Ultra, by the same token, probably doesn't have all of the members of the band playing on all the songs. In fact, it definitely doesn't, because Home and The Bottom Line are sung by Martin, and there is no proof that Fletch plays on any of the tracks of the album. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm being harsh on him. I don't know. I don't particularly care either. With this album, there was never a sense of cohesion around the songs together. The arrangements were too long. They were bloated. They clearly sounded like they'd been pieced together from studio recordings where someone had recorded lots and lots of different parts, and then they were assembling them in the studio, layering them like a cake or a lasagna. Millionaire sad disco lasagna. There you are. And the arrangements on some of the songs is really poor. Actually, when Alan was in the band, there was a very distinct sense of layering. There was a very distinct sense of musical parts being rotated. There was a sense of conclusion. Songs very clearly had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a climax. And some of the songs on this album definitely don't. Specifically, I'm thinking Free State and Insight. Free State being the 9th song, and Insight being the 11th song. And Love Thieves, actually. None of those songs particularly, they felt like they just started, went at a certain pace, and then stopped a bit. And that was the end of the song. If you were going to take 3 songs out of this album, I'd take Love Thieves, Jazz Thieves, and Free State out straight away. And then you'd have an 8-song LP, but it'd be a really good 8-song LP. And it'd also be about 47 minutes long, which is probably about the right length for this. And then you could bump Love Thieves and maybe Free State onto a greatest hits album, which of course came out in 1998, the year after. I think this album is a real disappointment to me, to be honest. The first single that was released in January, 31st of January 1997. Can you recall that far back? I'm not sure I can, although I can remember exactly where I heard it. So the first single that was released from the album was Barrel of a Gun. And like a lot of bands, Depeche were taking the view at this point that they could almost take for granted the fan base that they had, much like REM's Ebo the Letter, which came out the year before, and The Cure's 13th. Those were not representative of the sound that you would expect the band to have. When people were thinking about Depeche Mode in 1997, they weren't thinking about stuff like I Feel You. They were thinking about songs like Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, Strange Love, Master and Servant, Walking in My Shoes. They weren't thinking about a heavy, dense, slow-paced, intense rock track. And Barrel of a Gun, by the way, is a fantastic opening single. It's one of the best songs on the album, but it's the right song to open the album with. It's not necessarily the right song to release first from the album. It really absolutely isn't. Now, it came in a number of formats. Here's the gatefold 12-inch version of it, which has now, of course, been repressed as in the box set of the Ultra singles. So these 12 inches are still quite affordable. I think this one was £11 last year for me. And here's the remix 12 inch as well, which again was probably around about the same amount of money. And so Barrel of a Gun was backed with a phalanx, that's a good word, phalanx of remixes by third parties. So Depeche Mode weren't remixing their own material anymore. Other people were doing it for them. Underworld remixed the track. They did the hard mix, which is probably the worst Depeche Mode remix ever published. The soft mix, which is probably the best Depeche Mode remix ever issued. There was also a 3-phase mix. and there were two remixes by 1 Inch Punch, and 1 Inch Punch, I think, featured, is it Justin Sherman? I think who was in who sang on Bug Powder Dust, and a couple of other bands as well. I really should read the tracks on the back of here. Yeah, so it was he was in a band, I think, called, or maybe it might have been Paul Warfield, who was in a band called 1 Inch Punch, and the 1 Inch Punch remix, by the way, is really good. I mean, effectively, the music has been completely re-recorded, with Dave's vocal being the only thing that's been left and salvaged from the original. But it sounds like an alternate, heavy studio version of a rockier kind of take of Depeche. But Barrel of Gun itself, apart from the two 12 inches, also got a number of other releases. There was a promotional CD, here it is, with a radio edit, which is barely different, and a single version. And then the two CD singles. Now, these two CD singles were released in a pretty strange format, because what we traditionally think of as the back of the back of the case for the CD is actually the front, and the front is the back. So you would see this in the racks with this facing out front, and then the track listing here. Although I've reversed, you can reverse it around so that the CD single actually looks the way all the other CD singles look. But there was it was a hard, dense track to start with. It's not really commercial. It's not really accessible as such. It's very definitely a song that I think takes Depeche Mode's fan base for granted. It sounded like an extension of I Feel You. It follows the same kind of slow-paced, heavy guitar, dense track with a kind of like a dense atmospheric drumming. It's not fun. It's not a hit single at all. You listen to it and you go, it's a really good album track, but it's not a hit single. And for some reason, of course, it did quite well. I don't quite know why, but it did. Well, it worked very, very well live. The band played it live up until their most recent tour, which ended 4 years ago. But it sounded like a continuation of tracks like I Feel You and Rush, and things like Policy of Truth, as opposed to a lighter, bouncier, poppier Depeche Mode. So when I heard it, and I was kind of like, I can't tell, listening to this, that Alan has left the band. And I think that was quite successful, because the aim was to try and remind people that it's still Depeche Mode, even though it's only 3 people, and the primary musician has left the group. So it fooled me. But then the next release is perhaps not so good. The second single released from the album, and this is a bona fide Depeche Mode classic. Here it is, It's No Good. This is the promotional 12-inch. And the postcards. They used to send postcards to people that were on the band's mailing lists. And you could write to be on the band's mailing list if that's what you wanted to do. You could listen to the song by calling a telephone number if you wanted to, and calls cost 50p a minute. Good God, £30 an hour. And if you wrote to them at the address, which was, I think, Alveston Place in Leamington Spa, where I thought all the bands lived together, like the Beatles movie, all of the bands together. Can you imagine Oasis, Depeche Mode, Erasure, Spice Girls all living in a 2 up, 2 down in Leamington Spa? Good God. Alveston Place, 3 Alveston Place, cornerstone of music civilization in the 90s. Geez, nobody would ever get any sleep with the bands that were there. And the second single then was It's No Good. Much like Enjoy the Silence, much like Walking in My Shoes, It's No Good was clearly the most Depeche track on the album. It was the first and most obvious Depeche classic, and it was also, of course, the one which I think started to show the band's sense of humour. I think there's a couple of things about It's No Good, and in fact the whole of the Ultra album, that I don't particularly like. One of which is the snare drum sound is appalling. It's weak. It's like being punched by a kitten, or is perhaps about as strong as a cloud. It's just not a suitable snare drum sound at all. It's a snare drum out of a box, and the box really needs to have new batteries in it. But It's No Good is a good track. It's a really good track. It's classic Depeche Mode. Although obviously calling it It's No Good was a straightforward faux pas if you wanted to get good singles reviews. Here's a promotional CD of It's No Good, featuring a photograph of the band that became quite well known. There they are, standing somewhat bizarrely in a room where the wallpaper is very clearly the symbol that's on the front. And I must admit, you look at the symbolism that we've got on this single and the symbolism and artwork that we've got during the Ultra period, it doesn't feel like Depeche Mode at all. It's still Anton Corbijn, but it doesn't feel like Depeche Mode. And I think that, combined with Alan's departure and the slight change in sound, probably didn't do the band any particular favour. So for here, for example, the 2 CD singles that went with It's No Good and It's Terrible, No Good, Very Bad Indeed snare sound. But it's got a great video, because the video is the 3 members of Depeche Mode playing to completely disinterested people in a nightclub as some kind of parody band, and they've only got 1 hit. You know, if you're a 1-hit wonder, you're still better than a no-hit wonder. But if you're a 1-hit wonder, of course, you have to shut up and play the hits, or play the hit, depending on your point of view. And so therefore, It's No Good is kind of a parody, kind of almost getting in before anybody else. It's like, oh, they're washed up, they're not as good as they used to be. Because they go, yeah, we know, we did that in the video for It's No Good, thank you very much. It's an instant classic. Depeche played it live on, I think, every tour, I think, with a couple of minor exceptions, since its release. And it's an absolute belter live. And then that, of course, that was followed up with the release of the album Ultra itself, which I've kind of mentioned before. It's taken me 21 minutes to get to the album. Don't worry, it won't take me 21 minutes to get to the 5th song on the LP. This is the 2016 repressing on vinyl, which is a gatefold, which is broadly identical, apart from the fact that they has explanatory text, and it's got slightly different pictures on the inner sleeve there of the band. Ultra is a disappointment of an album. I think it's poorly sequenced, and as I said before, it's got 2 songs too many on it. And it follows up Barrel of a Gun with one of the worst songs Depeche Mode have ever recorded. The song is called The Love Thieves. It's shit, basically. It's got no layering, it's got no structure, it's got no tension. I mean, all the things that you think of when you think of Depeche Mode, it hasn't got any of those. It's got a lazy guitar line, which takes the vocal line from It Doesn't Matter Too from the Black Celebration album, and plays it on a slide guitar. And it's got just a very basic drum pattern. Now, the drum patterns, by the way, I should say this, I've tried to play the drum patterns on Ultra. The drumming on Ultra is really boring. No human player would play drum lines as boring as most of Ultra. So even though there are 5 guest drummers on the album, on tracks like Useless, for example, it sounds like a drum machine, and it sounds very, very rigid, and it sounds very boring, much like the worst REM songs, which are on Around the Sun, which sounds like someone's just pressed, gone to select tempo 13, go, that's your, and then it just goes dum, ch, dum, ch, dum, dum, ch, and there's no variation in it, there's no humanity in it, there's no punctuation in it. It's featureless, it's monotonous, it's a very, very beige set of drum tracks on this album. And if you're a drummer, you try and play along to Ultra and you go, God, I'm bored. I'm really bored, especially on a track like Love Thieves. There's no change in it at all. There's an extra paradiddle maybe in the 4th minute, and that's it. And there's no, the backing vocals almost feel like they were recorded at the last minute, because there's no structure to them. They're not. Backing vocals normally work in a call and response fashion with the lead vocal. Here, they pretty much replicate, if they're there at all. There's only 1 track actually on the album, Insight, where the backing vocals are, in my opinion, touched by human hands. And Insight has some fantastic backing vocals on it, but sadly that's the last song on the album. The damage has already been done. The drum patterns are boring and tedious. The bass lines are very, very straightforward. Normally when Alan was in the band, there were 2 or more bass lines for each one of the tracks, one of which was like a lead melodic bass, and the other one was kind of like a second call and response rhythm bass, and you were able to listen to it. And even listening to the rhythm tracks on some of them, the Alan era songs. You kind of thought that's a hit. Here, none of the songs sounded like hits if you just listen to the rhythm tracks. If you remember Happy Monday, Step On, for example, or the guy from the record company was listening to just the bass and the drum tracks for the song, and he went, "That's a hit single. I can tell just by listening to the rhythms that's a hit single." You can't do that with Ultra, I'm afraid. Depeche were learning how to be, and this album and Exciter are the two albums which most obviously suffered from the lack of Alan, because the band were learning how to be Depeche Mode again, and they weren't particularly successful at it, by the way. Third track on the album is the first Martin Gore vocal. It is Home, which is a Depeche Mode classic, undoubtedly a Depeche Mode classic. It was also one of the first songs that was written for the album. So the three songs that they went into the studio with in early 1996, Home, Insight and Useless. Home is the first song that most people heard from that, and it is a classic. With a gorgeous string section that really adds drama and tension, similar to One Caress, and like Barrel of a Gun, like Walking in My Shoes, like Condemnation. Home touches upon some of the very, very common lyrical themes that exist inside Depeche Mode songs. So themes of judgment, redemption, legacy, consequence, hangover, pleasure, pain, hedonism, and the heaviness that comes after it, because what goes up surely must come down. And that is very much the message which you get from Ultra. Ultra is very much a come down album. If Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion are perhaps the crazy night out, Ultra is very definitely the crashing thump of a Sunday morning, as you suddenly realise exactly what you said and what you did, and you hope to God that nobody else remembers. And Home, by the way, was the third single released from the album. In the UK, it had a 12-inch release, and it had a CD issue. Here's a promotional CD. Oh no, that's useless, actually. Sorry, guys. I completely lied to you. It had two CD singles, here and here. The second CD single, this one, had live versions of Barrel of a Gun and It's No Good on it, from one of the two shows the band played to promote the LP. This one had loads of remixes, and having loads of remixes, no new song. Now, if you're a Depeche Mode fan, you don't necessarily buy the 12 inches for the remixes, unless you're a certain kind of person. And I am that certain kind of person. Hell, be who you are, right? But Home was basically backed with a ton of remixes and a ton of live tracks. And the last time Depeche Mode backed a single with a ton of remixes and a ton of live tracks and no new studio material, it was In Your Room. But that had a ton of live tracks and a ton of remixes on. And then before that, I think it was A Question of Time in 1986, neither of which charted particularly well. Depeche Mode fans, when they were buying singles, they liked to buy them for the songs and not necessarily for the remixes. So Home didn't chart particularly well. In fact, it didn't chart particularly well to the point where, in America, it became a double A side, the first double A side by Depeche in a very long time, since 1984's Blasphemous Rumours and it was backed with the fourth single that was released in the UK, which is Useless. Useless is an absolute classic Depeche Mode track. I love it to bits. It's the sixth song on the LP. It is one of the best ones. It is, put technically, a banger live, I think, as well. It has live bass on it by Doug Wimbush, and I think it has live drums by someone whose name I've forgotten to write down as well. And it really sounds like the band are making a proper effort with Home and Useless. These are better singles than you might expect. If Useless had been the first track or had been recorded for the Exciter sessions, it would have been the first single released, because it's certainly better than anything on Exciter. And Useless is still played live to this day. It was played frequently, actually, on the 2017-2018 tour. And here is the American CD single of Home. It was originally in some kind of weird snapper pack. The version I got was second-hand. Somebody had taken it out of the snapper pack, and they'd taken all the stuff out, and they'd kind of forced it to fit inside a jewel case. But it was £1.50 instead of about £7.99. And so I'm very comfortable about that. The American version of Useless, by the way, has a previously unavailable CJ Bolland funky sub mix, which you can't get on any of the other formats. But in the UK, it got 2 CD singles. This is the promo version of it, which has the same 3 tracks as the first CD single. The remix, Escape from Wherever, parts 1 and 2, and the Cosmic Blues mix, by the way. And the Escape from Wherever mix is remixed by Barry Adamson, who was also a mute. And then the second CD single here features a live version of Useless. It features CJ Bolland remixes, and it also features the Kruder and Dorfmeister mix, which is one of the best Depeche Mode remixes that there is. And here's a photograph of Dave Gahan's hand. Not quite sure why, but there you are. Ultra was not to it. It kind of fell pretty quickly. This is the original CD from 1997 of it, and it kind of fell out of the charts of the public eye. Like a lot of bands, it sold a lot in its first week. It didn't sell very much in week 22, unlike some of the other albums, because the band didn't tour it. And so what we had instead was an experience of a Depeche Mode album without actually a Depeche Mode band. And they only played 2 live public appearances, short 27-minute sets. One in London on the 12th of April 1997. I was seeing the Manic Street Preachers at the Royal Albert Hall that night, by the way, Fact fans. And one at LA's Exposition Shrine Hall on the 26th of May 1997. I wrote that down. It's on a bit of paper that's just over there to act as a prompt. And because I don't like the cover to Ultra, it doesn't feel like an album cover. I've instead turned the booklet around, so we've got this as the cover, and that feels more like a Depeche Mode album cover to me than the cover that we actually got for the LP. I'm only halfway through the album, side 1, ending on Useless. Slipping over to side 2 of Ultra, we have, what is it now? We have Sister of Night, the last genuine classic on the album, one of my favourite Depeche Mode songs, one of the first ones to be recorded. So when the band recorded at Abbey Road, Eastcote, West Side, Strong Room, Rack, Larrabee West in LA, and Electric Lady in New York, Sister of Night was recorded at Electric Lady in New York, and it was the only Dave Gahan vocal that was finished out of the 7 tracks which the band had recorded at that point. And it's the only vocal on the album which was recorded before Dave went into rehab to tackle his addictions, and was spliced together from many multiple vocal takes of the track. It's a fantastic vocal, it's a fantastic song. I'm very glad it's on the LP. Sister of Night is one of my very favourite Depeche Mode songs, and I should say, although I'm being quite harsh about Ultra, it has 5 genuinely really good Depeche Mode tracks on it, and those are Barrel of a Gun, It's No Good, Useless, Home, and Sister of Night. It also has 3 absolute stinkers, basically any song with the word thieves in it, Love Thieves, Jazz Thieves, and Free State, I think, is pretty much the worst of the album. And I have nothing to say about Jazz Thieves, track 8. It's a tortured, forgettable instrumental that in previous lives would have been appended to the end of another song and not even given a title. Whereas track 9 on the album, or track 3, side 2, if you're a vinyl fiend, is Free State. It reminds me a lot of what Higher Love was, actually, but you can really tell the difference between Alan's approach to layering and construction of the song and textures, and the album with Alan's absence when you listen to Free State, because Free State could have been as good as Higher Love. It could have been an incredible song that ended the LP, but it didn't have the sense of drama, tension, release, conclusion. It didn't have the structure, it didn't have the layering. It just started, and it went at a certain speed. It cruised on the motorway at about 40 miles an hour. It had some very mundane guitar playing on it that had no lyrical or no stylistic invention in it. So anyone could have played those guitar lines. It sounded like if someone had said, do a song that sounds like Depeche Mode and you've got an hour to do it. That's what Free State would have been. And it's got some very boring drum parts as well. So there's no sense of any compulsion in some of these songs in Ultra. You listen to some of the songs in Ultra and you go, do these songs need to exist? Do they need to be recorded? Did they have to exist? And one of the things that makes me come back to an album, that makes me listen to an album again and again, is a sense of going, the band just couldn't keep the music in themselves. They had to do this. They had to record it. They had to perform it. And you can feel, the passion and the compulsion and the integrity flying out of the grooves. And with Free State, you kind of got a sense that actually it was a Thursday towards the end of the month and the band needed another song to finish the album. And they were like, well, this do. It feels like homework listening to Free State. And that's not the way that I want it to be at all. And then we've got the last two songs on the album. The Bottom Line, not my favourite, but it's serviceable. It fits well inside the context of the LP. And Insight. And as I've said before, Insight's quite good. It's not amazing, but it's quite good. And it opens with, or more correctly, it has the most lively backing vocals. Now, what people underrate, and I've mentioned this previously, was how good backing vocals give you the sense that the band have actually worked this through. The good thing about the backing vocals on Insight is actually they come in the middle of a line, and they're not rigid to the rhythm of the song, so they kind of sit around the vocal. They're either just before or just behind the vocal, with a repeated line from one of the verses, and it's a great song. Actually, Insight is a great song, not amazing, but it's really good. Although, if it had been recorded for Songs of Faith and Devotion, it probably would have been a B-side, as indeed Free State, Jazz Thieves and Love Thieves would have been B-sides as well. And actually, of the songs on this album, I think two songs haven't been played live. I don't think, I'm not sure, I don't think Free State's been played live. And Love Thieves has been played live, but not by Depeche Mode. It's been played live by Martin Gore on his 2003 solo tour, which I saw at the London Astoria. I have no memory of that show. I know there's videos of it on YouTube. I don't really remember anything about it now, but I know I was there. And so Ultra is overall, it's too long. It's got too many songs on it. It needs at least 10 minutes slicing out of it. Some of the songs need to be rearranged, and they need to be given a little bit more thought and care and attention, I think it's fair to say. And the band didn't tour because Dave wasn't well enough to tour. He was recovering from his addictions, and so the band instead kind of held back and did a hits album in 1998. In fact, as far as touring for the album went, there's a bootleg CD called Ultra Live, which is just TV appearances. And there is the last one of the bootleg remix albums, which were very, very popular, but also absolutely crap. Here's the Ultra remix album, which adds an extra 17 minutes onto the album, but it doesn't make it any better. It's not 17 minutes better at all. So the band went back into the studio, and they recorded some more material. They recorded 3 extra songs, which became the next Depeche Mode single, which was released in late 1998, Only When I Lose Myself. They really outdid it for this. So Only When I Lose Myself was also released in conjunction with the singles 86 to 98, and the band's first post-Allen tour. So Only When I Lose Myself, here's a 12-inch of it, I think it's one of the great Depeche Mode classics. It's very underrated, actually, as a track. It has the sense of drama and compulsion and the sense of tension and release, which goes with the best of Depeche Mode tracks. If this had been released on Ultra, or if it had been, for example, released with Alan in the band, everyone would be like, it's incredible! And it is, but the problem is it's slow, it's moody, and the band have disowned it, really. They've barely played it live after the singles tour in 1998, and I don't think they've played it live since. Maybe Martin played it on his solo tour, but Only When I Lose Myself is a very, very underrated Depeche Mode track. And in fact, the EP, the 3-track single of Only When I Lose Myself, backed with Surrender and Head Star, this is one of the best singles that Depeche Mode have ever released in terms of a package. Only When I Lose Myself is a great track. I absolutely love it. And Surrender is as good as anything on Ultra, and probably better than most of it. And if Only When I Lose Myself and Surrender had been on the album, Firstly, everyone will be begging the band to play Surrender live. Secondly, everyone will go, it's as good as Songs of Faith and Devotion, because these are fantastic songs. And the fact that Surrender is even to this date not on an official Depeche Mode CD album is baffling. It baffles me completely, although they do play it live occasionally. And it's just got this wonderful air to it, a kind of desolate interstellar blues from the future, played by sad computers. Only when I lose myself, while I was putting it technically, formatted to fuck. There were lots and lots of issues and versions of it. Here's a promotional CD, which features the radio in it and the album version, which is due to be released on the 7th of September 1998. Only 24 years ago now. There was a CD single with the 3 studio tracks on. There was a second CD which had remixes by Subsonic Legacy, Dan the Automator, and a Luke Slater remix of Headstar. Don't quite know why. Headstar's not amazing. It probably doesn't need a remix. A third CD single of Only When I Lose Myself, which had remixes by Gus Gus, DJ Shadow, Catalan FC, and a Sapphire remix of World in My Eyes. And the band didn't get Alan's permission and sign off to release that version of World in My Eyes, which also, by the way, features multi-tracks and parts from a show in San Francisco in 1994. It's an okay remix, but you kind of go, what's the point, really? Clearly, at this point, Depeche were getting people to remix old songs. And I think the first Alan knew about it was when somebody told him that there was a remix of World in My Eyes on a CD single that he didn't know about. I mean, obviously he's consulted about what releases come out that he's played on and performed on, but he is one of four people there. He doesn't have the casting vote or the power of veto. The singles, 81 to 85, was repressed, remastered in a new cover with a couple of bonus tracks on it, being the original version of Photographic for the band's first vinyl appearance, and the 12-inch mix I just can't get enough. And the second greatest hits album, Singles 86 to 98, was issued as well, which features all of the singles in order, with the exception of Little 15, which was only released in France, and Everything Counts Live, both of which were bookended as appendixes at the end of CD2. It's quite a good package. It looks quite good. It's mastered quite loud, but it really, I think, was released as an excuse for the band to tour. There was also a remixes promo CD. Here it is, which features 10 remixes, which was effectively the band's first remix album. Very easy to get a copy of this at the time. There's still a couple of pretty rare mixes on there, but it has some absolutely killer mixes on. And they're all presented sequentially, and then the band went out on tour. They played their first tour since Alan had left the band as a 5-piece, with Martin, Dave, Fletch on keyboards, Peter Cordino on keyboards and vocals, and the drummer Christian Eigner, who I think was German, might be Austrian, who joined the group and played drums. I saw them at the Birmingham NEC in 1998. On that tour, it was my first post-Alan show. I thought it was very, very good, but I think it was exactly what the band needed to do. They needed to get their confidence back up, and it was a safe way of playing live without having to plug a new album, without having to think about the legacy of the band, and without being able to just kind of carry on as a new version of the band, but have that safety net of the old hits to make sure that the shows went well and build their confidence back up. Again, as I said, Depeche were learning how to be Depeche Mode again, and they were growing up in public, and it was quite interesting to watch. But they didn't film, or, well, more correctly, they didn't release a DVD or a VHS of the tour. They filmed edited highlights, which lasted for 47 minutes on MTV, filmed at the Cologne Arena on the 5th of October 1998, which was a Monday, because I saw them on the Saturday, the 3rd of October 1998 at the Birmingham NEC. Here is a bootleg CD of that television broadcast, and I really wish that they'd released the full show, but I don't know if any copies of the full show still exist or could be compiled. But it was a great tour. It was an enjoyable tour. It was fun. It was great to see the band again. I had thought that Depeche Mode had died. I thought I'd lived through and seen the end of them on that tour, and I'm really, really pleased that I was wrong. The singles tour It was also advertised with this wonderfully bizarre kind of fold-out bit of paper, which was a thing that went off in record stores and things. Advertised the show. The first show was in Helsinki, for example, so they were playing some shows. They played about a month of shows before they got to the UK to make sure that they ironed out any kinks. Mute Bank did a number of offers. Various T-shirts and things were released, but it was a the singles tour was a great time to be a fan of Depeche Mode. The band were being reborn in front of our eyes, and we felt that there was a life after Alan, which it really felt like. Certainly in 1996, it really felt like there might not be a Depeche Mode in future. After all, the 5.1 DVD documentary just say, oh well, that's the end of the band. And this was released in 2006. It contains no previously unreleased material apart from the documentary, but it has the Ultra album in 5.1. It has a remastered version of the CD. These are quite difficult to get these days, and I do hope that they do get repressed and reissued sometime soon, because they are essential parts of the Depeche Mode discography. So happy 25th anniversary, happy birthday to Ultra, the album we thought we'd never get, and it's surprisingly good considering the circumstances in which it was made, with the band's key musician departing, the band's singer dying multiple times during recording, and the band not knowing whether there was going to be a band or an album indeed. The only thing I'd change about Ultra would be the sequencing, and I'd take 3 of the tracks off, but I've told you which 3 those are. I'm really glad it exists. It's aged far better than I thought it might. And that is the 25th anniversary, 25th birthday for Ultra, the album we thought we'd never get. Happy birthday, Ultra. And I'm really glad that it gave the band a new lease of life, because now the band have been going without Alan for twice as long as when he was in the group. And Alan's been out of the group for twice as long as he was in the group, which is pretty amazing. I try not to think too much about history or time. I prefer to live in the moment, despite what all these episodes